Well, let's go ahead and turn in our Bibles. We'll go turn in our Bibles to Ephesians chapter 6. And we'll continue our study on the armor of God. Let's go ahead and read. We'll read Ephesians chapter 6, and we'll start reading in verse number 10. And so we'll read that here this evening. Finally, my brethren, be strong in the Lord and in the power of his might. Put on the whole armor of God, that ye may be able to stand against the wiles of the devil. For we wrestle not against flesh and blood, but against principalities, against powers, against the rulers of the darkness of this world, against spiritual wickedness in high places. Wherefore take unto you the whole armor of God, that ye may be able to withstand in the evil day. And having done all to stand, stand therefore, having your loins girt about with truth, and having on the breastplate of righteousness, and your feet shod with the preparation of the gospel of peace. Above all, taking the shield of faith, wherewith ye shall be able to quench all the fiery darts of the wicked. And so we have made our way down to the shield of faith. And a statement is made there, above all, taking the shield of faith. And the shield of a Roman soldier was made up of a couple different materials. It was made up of wood, it was made up of metal. It was also had leather and sometimes even some fabric in that shield. And that soldier's shield would be used as a means of defense, of course, and it would receive the arrows of the enemy. It's often been considered that during battle, I'm going to read you something here about these shields. It's been considered that during battle they could even have taken that shield and wet it down a little bit so that it would in fact have some quenching ability to any fiery arrows that were shot. I wanted to read this to you here. The shield completed the defensive ensemble of a soldier. With it, soldiers could deflect attacks, allowing them to retaliate in tight formations. Shields were be overlapped, enhancing protection even further, and historical military equipment of other cultures lacked such innovative designs. This gave the Roman soldiers a distinct advantage. And we'd remember that Paul is writing this book of Ephesians, and he would have been familiar with Roman soldiers. Another interesting thing that these soldiers would do was not only would they use it for their personal defense, they would join together, and they would join themselves closely so there could be a wall of defense. And there's even a formation that they would hold that translated into English was called the tortoise formation. And the reason it was called the tortoise formation was because you would have shields on the sides and on top, and so it would be a formation of soldiers. And the ones on the outside would have their shield in front of them and as a barrier on the sides and on the back. And then you'd have the ones in the middle with their shields upwards, and these shields would form what they called a tortoise shell. And so they would go forward into battle with or they would take a stand, whatever the case would be, and their shields would be used to receive and to defend the attacks of the enemy. A Roman soldier's shield was often 2.5 feet wide by 4 feet tall, and so you can imagine that's a fairly large shield. And they would go into battle with these instruments of defense. It was as I read here out of this one statement, the shield completed the defensive armor of the soldier. He had his breastplate, and the child of God has his breastplate of righteousness. The soldier had other means of defense, but it was his shield that was that completed it all and held it all together. And the scriptures say, for the child of God, above all, don't go to battle without it. You won't be complete. Above all, taking the shield of faith. faith is to be a prioritized piece of armor that we take each and every day. It is to be that shield of faith that protects us from the fiery darts, notice, that is able to quench all the fiery darts of the wicked. Scriptures say, above all, whatever you do, don't forget your shield. Child of God, don't forget that shield of faith, because it is able, it has the defensive ability to quench every dart that can be fired at the believer. Every one of them. I think about that. Oftentimes we know that we have a defense in the Lord against certain things. But there's that one thing that always gets us, and it's just that hardship, or it's just that difficult thing, or it's that temptation, or whatever it is. It just is always able to get in, and it's as if we kind of give ourselves over to the fact that we can stand against everything else that is fired at us, but there's that one thing that we're just not able to overcome. The Scriptures say that the shield of faith is able to quench all and every fiery dart that the wicked would launch at us. Remember, we're talking about spiritual warfare. We're talking about spiritual armor, for we wrestle not against flesh and blood. So what could some of these fiery darts be? Obviously, the fiery darts do not have your well-being in mind, and neither does the one who is firing them. The fiery darts, speaking to the fact of they are going to hurt if they're not protected against. They are going to inflict damage if they're not protected against. It is the fiery darts, the fiery arrows, if you will, that would put soldiers out of commission in the battlefield. It was fiery darts that sent many a letter home to mothers and wives and said, your husband has been lost in battle. It is these fiery arrows that we must take seriously in our Christian walk, because fiery darts of the wicked are there to take Christians down in their spiritual stand. I think of a couple. This is by no means a complete list. And I would say different things and different arrows are fired at each and every believer. But we can know for a fact that we will have fiery darts, arrows shot at us. Here are a few. How about the arrows or the darts of discouragement? Why, that's one that comes often. And the devil would be more than thrilled to strike a Christian with a fiery dart of discouragement. How about a dart or the fiery dart of pride? It is a sin that God hates. But yet wouldn't Satan love for a Christian who's taking his stand to be struck by pride? Or how about of deceit? The devil is full of deception. Or how about, this is a broad category, how about temptation? The fiery darts of temptation. Of course, Satan would be thrilled if one of those darts of temptation was not quenched by a shield and was not stopped by a shield of faith, but struck and inflicted great damage on that Christian soldier. What of worry? What of busyness? Sometimes we are so busy that we are rendered quite useless in our walk with God. How about unbelief? You say, how could a Christian ever lack belief in God? It is a chief means that the devil puts many a Christian out of commission by unbelief. What of slothfulness? The Scriptures say that the child of God is able to stand against and is able to have every fiery dart quenched with the shield of faith. And so for the child of God to get up every day and to live his life and to not consider if he has taken on the shield of faith, He's doing himself a disservice. And best beware lest he is struck by one of these fiery darts. So take, above all, it is the complementary, it is the completing factor. It makes the soldier whole. It prepares him to take a stand. Take unto you the shield of faith. Notice the type, we looked at what a Roman soldier's shield would have been made of. Wood, metal, leather. It would have been made to stop fiery darts. Let me tell you what the shield of the believer is made up of, or must be made of if it's going to stop fiery darts. It is not the shield of self-confidence. It is not the shield of discipline. It is not the shield of ability or strength or talent. The fiery darts can go right through that kind of a shield. It is the shield of faith, the shield of trust and confidence in God. Trust is necessary. Trust in God as a foe is met. Oftentimes, what is the confidence that we go about our life in? Who is our faith in? There are times we go about our lives and we don't have confidence in anything. We don't have confidence in ourselves. We're not going in confidence with the Lord. And while we might be right to not have confidence in and of ourselves, we will fall victim and prey to the fiery darts of the wicked because our confidence is not in the Lord. Sometimes we go into battle and we go to take a stand and we have loads of confidence and loads of faith in ourselves. That's a very bad day for the child of God to be attempting to take a stand. The child of God is to be standing with his confidence and his trust not in himself, but in his God. And so it is called the shield of faith. Too many believers are held at bay and wounded because they are not standing in faith, in trust, in confidence of God. To be strong in the Lord is to wear the character He enables believers to possess. Let me give you a couple illustrations. Let's turn over to Hebrews 11. Let's turn over to Hebrews chapter 11. You might know where we're going with this already. In Hebrews chapter 11, we find many a man and woman who lived a life of faith. The Scriptures would say in verse number 4 that by faith Abel offered unto God a more excellent sacrifice than Cain. In verse number 5, by faith Enoch was translated that he should not see death. In verse number 6, a great verse of Scripture, but without faith it is impossible to please God. For he that cometh to God must believe that He is, and that He is a rewarder of them that diligently seek Him. In verse number 7, by faith Noah, being warned of God, of things not seen as yet, moved with fear and prepared an ark to the saving of his house. In verse number 8, by faith Abraham, when he was called to go out into a place which he should after receive for his inheritance, obeyed. Verse number 9, by faith he sojourned in a land of promise. Verse number 10, by faith, for he looked for a city which hath foundations, whose builder and maker is God. Verse number 11, through faith also Sarah herself received strength to conceive seed. Verse number 17, by faith Abraham, when he was tried, offered up Isaac, and he that had received the promise offered up his only begotten son, of whom it was said that in Isaac shall thy seed be called. Notice, accounting, that means he counted it true of God, accounting that God was able to raise him up even from the dead, from whence also he received him in a figure. By faith Isaac blessed Jacob and Esau concerning things to come. By faith Jacob, when he was dying, blessed both the sons of Joseph and worshipped God, leaning upon his staff. These are men and women of faith. If you would recall, and if you were present for a message a while back, we looked at how Abraham was justified by his faith. But as we would read through the hall of faith, as it has been called, that the faith of these individuals extended beyond saving faith, but it extended into their practical daily lives. We would know Abraham was a man who God had counted righteous for years before he ever stood with Isaac, his son. And yet he was willing to offer his son as a sacrifice because that is what God asked for. The scriptures say he accounted it true of God. That God, if Isaac or if Abraham followed through in obedience with what God said and did slay his son, it was said of Abraham that he, by faith, counted God powerful enough to raise his son back from the dead. After all, wasn't it through Isaac that God had promised all those things to Abraham? Abraham recognized that if it was God had promised him Isaac, and if Isaac were to die, God was still going to be faithful to all his promises. And so he counted God faithful, although he'd never seen a man raised from the dead. Is that interesting? A picture of Christ. But he understood that God could have raised him from the dead. And so he was willing to offer his only begotten son, his son of promise. These are all men of great faith. Men who chose to live by faith and take up the shield of faith each and every day. We come down to a man here, his name is Joseph. By faith, in verse number 22, Joseph, when he died, made mention of the departing of the children of Israel and gave commandment concerning his bones. Isn't that interesting? Joseph understood that despite the position he held in Egypt, and despite the providence of God and how God had sent him to preserve his people and his family, Joseph recognized by faith that God had promised to Abraham, therefore to Isaac, therefore to Jacob, his father, and therefore to him and his family, that they would one day return to take possession of the land of promise that they'd been given. And so by faith, before he died, he gave commandment concerning his bones, that his bones would be taken out of Egypt. Because although years would go by, many pharaohs would go by, in fact, centuries would go by before the children of Israel would return to that land of promise. But Joseph was a man of faith. I think about Joseph. Let's turn over to Genesis chapter 39 for a minute. Genesis chapter 39, because sometimes the darts that are fired at us are of worry and fear. Other times they are to yield to temptation. And I want us to consider a few practical things, how you and I can stand in faith. There's a couple phrases that are made, and you'll remember Joseph. Joseph was that son of Jacob, and he was favored. He was given that coat of many colors. And his brothers thought ill of him. He probably didn't help the matter, but he had these dreams that God sent him. And he spoke loudly about these dreams, about how one day he was the star in the middle, and all the stars bowed down to him. And he had another dream about there were those sheaves in the field, and Joseph was the one standing in the middle, and they were around him, and they bowed before him. And of course, this wasn't well taken by his brothers. But Joseph would then be carried off into a faraway land. And notice a few things about Joseph. Joseph and God, their relationship did not change despite geographical positions. And so Joseph, whenever he was taken to Egypt, still walked and still served and still had faith in the same God he did in his homeland. And in verse number 2 of chapter 39, the scriptures say, "And the Lord was with Joseph, and he was a prosperous man, and he was in the house of his master the Egyptian. And his master saw that the Lord was with him, and that the Lord made all that he did to prosper in his hand." You see a few things here about Joseph. The scriptures say that the Lord was with Joseph. And then notice at the end of verse number 2, "And he was in the house of his master, the Egyptian." The Lord was with Joseph, and he was in the house of his master, the Egyptian. We would find that Egyptian man, who we would call Potiphar, he had found favor in the eyes of Potiphar because he was a man of integrity. He was a man that was favored. He was a man that God prospered and blessed. And so the scriptures would say about Joseph that Potiphar gave to Joseph all that was in his house. And it was said of Potiphar and Joseph that Potiphar didn't even know all the details. He didn't know what all he had. He had given it to his servant, actually his slave Joseph, to take care of. And Joseph prospered it so well that he counted Joseph faithful and left it for Joseph to be the steward, and he didn't even know what was in his house. He just knew that it was prospering. And he said, "I found a man who has favor with God. I found a man who is prosperous, and everything he touches, it's like it turns to gold. And so I've left all this in his hands." And if only that were the end of the story, but it's not, because we would find that Joseph's going to face some difficulty, because at one point, actually multiple points, Potiphar's wife is going to come to Joseph and speak with him, and there are going to be fiery darts of the devil that are going to be shot and fired towards this man Joseph. And of course, we know what the scriptures say about Joseph, and we know his testimony. And one day, as he ran and fled from the house, as he fled the fiery darts of the wicked, his coat was caught, and Potiphar's wife would falsely accuse Joseph of something that he had not done, something that he had not even attempted to do. Joseph would then go to prison and spend well over 2 years in that prison. You remember, he was forgotten. He told the butler what his dream meant. And the butler went and was restored into his place. But that butler would forget about Joseph for 2 whole years. Wow. And for 2 whole years, Joseph, who thought he had a hope in that butler, was forgotten, but not by God. And we turn over to verse number 21 and verse number 23. We see about Joseph's life in that prison. In verse number 21, we see the Lord was with Joseph and showed him mercy and gave him favor in the sight of the keeper of the prison. And the keeper of the prison committed to Joseph's hand all the prisoners that were in the prison. And whatsoever they did, there he was the doer of it. The keeper of the prison looked not to anything that was under his hand. because the Lord was with him. And that which he did, the Lord made to prosper. Too often we make circumstances a crutch or an excuse for why we are not living and why we are not taking the stand that God has called us to stand in. Let me give you some examples from Joseph's life. Joseph faced favoritism. You say that's not a bad thing. That can be a fiery dart. That can be a difficulty. He faced favoritism. He faced rejection. His brothers sold him. He faced slavery and all that was entailed with it. He faced discouragement as he was falsely thrown into a prison. Did I mention that? Oh, we'll get to that. He faced disappointment. He faced the weight of large responsibilities. He faced temptation, specifically Potiphar's wife. He faced injustice as he was cast into a prison for years for something he didn't do. He faced false accusation. He faced solitude. He was in prison, and he was forgotten by men. I see a lot of fiery darts that would have well taken down many a believer. And as I mentioned earlier, we make circumstances an excuse for why we are not standing at our best. We tell ourselves and others around us we were just dealt a bad hand in this life. The odds just weren't in our favor. I was just given these troubles of life. But yet Joseph, in the midst of all this, was a man who lived conscious of God's presence, God's power, and God's provision. Whenever Joseph was sold into slavery, I would point out that the reason that he became favored in Potiphar's house was not because solely of the fact that he was talented and was, maybe good. He was obviously good with numbers and some different things. No, the reason that he was able to find favor in Potiphar's house, and the reason why he was able, think about him. Joseph was sold as a slave. He could have been like any other slave. He could have been building buildings. He could have been hauling water. All these different things. But Joseph found himself in a very high place and position. It was because, despite the fact of all these wrongdoings that had come against him, he still maintained his faith in God. He still held a trust in God and great confidence in his God. And the scriptures say that in Pharaoh's house, the Bible doesn't say that Joseph was with Pharaoh, or with Potiphar, in Potiphar's house. The scriptures say that Joseph, the Lord was with Joseph. And Joseph was a man who lived conscious of God's presence. I think that's how he stood against that woman that sought to cause him to sin. He stood recognizing the presence of God with him. He stood recognizing the power and the provision of God with him as well. And whenever he was cast into prison, before he ever saw Pharaoh's court, he was living in faith and in trust and in full confidence of a God, his God, the only God, the God of his salvation. And the presence of the Lord is not reserved simply for men like Joseph and men like Abraham and men like Isaac and Jacob. In fact, we find that every believer today is indwelt by the Holy Spirit of God. In a very real sense, you and I can say that God, the Holy Spirit, the Lord, is with us. The question is, do we allow His holy presence to control every area of our lives? Do we live in faith? Do we take up that shield of faith? Because I think of the fact that whenever temptation comes, whenever discouragement comes, I'd better be holding that shield of faith. I better be holding my trust in God. I better have great confidence in the Lord. And as the child of God stands in confidence and faith to his God, it completes. It is that above all, it is that completing piece of armor. Above all, take the shield of faith. Above all, stand with your confidence in God. Above all, stand trusting Him and relying on His presence and His power and His provision. And you and I can stand, having done all to stand, and having pleased the Lord, having put on the whole armor of God. Well,